While I was struggling with jealousy, he was giving her what I lacked: attention, closeness, warmth. And now I know, she didn't steal him. He gave himself away. I dated Justin for a little over 7 months. We met in the spring and I fell for him almost immediately. I still remember the first time we locked eyes at that bookstore downtown. He was standing by the poetry section, flipping through a weathered anthology like he was searching for a specific verse, and when he noticed me staring, he smiled in that easy, confident way that made my stomach flip. He was charismatic, funny without trying, and had this warm attentiveness that made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. It wasn't long before coffee dates turned into dinners, and dinners into weekends spent in each other's arms. For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel loved, I felt safe, chosen. I used to roll my eyes at those people who claimed they just knew when they'd found the one, but with Justin, I started imagining what it might be like to have someone beside me for the long haul. I could see it: lazy Sundays with coffee and crossword puzzles, arguing about which shade of blue to paint a nursery, holding hands through everything life threw at us. I let myself believe in something I never really thought I'd get to have. And God, that made everything that followed so much harder. But from the very beginning, there was one shadow between us: Olivia, his best friend from college. They had a 6-year friendship that seemed to be carved in stone, the kind where they finished each other's sentences and had inside jokes that made me feel like an outsider, no matter how hard I tried not to let it get to me. Justin was always upfront about her, always called her like a sister, and swore up and down that nothing romantic had ever happened between them, but there was something about the way he lit up when her name came up, something about how quickly he'd respond to her texts, or how he'd casually mention little things she liked or disliked as if they were etched into his brain, that made my stomach twist with unease. I hated feeling that way, jealous, insecure, like I was competing with a ghost of a relationship that was never even defined as romantic. But no matter how often he reassured me, the worry stuck around like static, buzzing just beneath the surface. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was overthinking, told myself every relationship came with a past, but the truth was, it felt like Olivia was never really in the past at all. She was still there, still a part of his present, and sometimes, it felt like there wasn't quite enough room for both of us in it. Olivia was witty, sassy, and, unfortunately, exactly the type of woman Justin had always liked: tall, athletic, confident in a way that drew attention without even trying, with that kind of easy, magnetic energy that made people want to orbit around her. She had this piercing gaze that made you feel like she saw straight through you, and a subtle flirtation in the way she moved, the way she laughed just a little too long at his jokes, or touched his arm when she spoke to him, like she was always testing the boundary of what was acceptable. I watched her closely whenever we were in the same room, pretending not to, of course, because I didn't want to be that girlfriend, the one who's paranoid, the one who seems threatened by a friend, but I saw the way her eyes lingered on him, the way she'd tilt her head just so when he was talking, as if every word he said was a secret only she could fully understand. And it hurt. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, because even if Justin never crossed the line, it felt like Olivia was always dancing on the edge of one. She touched his clothes like they belonged to her, let her fingers trail across the fabric of his sleeves as if she had every right, hugged him from behind with a familiarity that made my skin crawl, and leaned in close to whisper things into his ear with her lips far too close for comfort. And all of it happened right in front of me, as if I were invisible, as if my presence didn't matter. I remember one night in particular, when we were out at this crowded club with some of his college friends, the music thumping loud enough to rattle the floor, and Olivia waltzed up to him, wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, pressed her body against his, and said, loud enough for me to hear over the music, "Why don't you hug me like you used to?" I watched his face as he turned, not with shock or discomfort, but with a smile, like it was some sweet little inside joke, like it was nothing. And me? I just stood there, frozen, my drink sweating in my hand, heart pounding with something between rage and heartbreak, not sure if I should walk away or scream. I tried to talk to him about it one night after we got home, my voice carefully measured, my words tiptoeing around the storm building in my chest, and he just laughed it off like it was nothing, shrugged like I was making a big deal out of something harmless, and said, "It's just Olivia. She's like that with everyone." But I knew, God, I knew she was only like that with him. I had seen her around other people, around our mutual friends, around guys she barely knew, and she never touched them like that, never leaned in so close, never said things that blurred the line between memory and suggestion. It wasn't some quirky personality trait. It was intentional, it was specific, and it was always aimed at Justin. And the worst part was that he refused to see it, or maybe he chose not to. The climax came one night at a bar downtown, a dimly lit place we used to go to with his friends, where the music was loud and the drinks came fast, and for some reason Justin got into it with a guy near the pool table, some stupid misunderstanding over a spilled drink or a look exchanged too long. I don't even remember the details anymore, just the tension in the air and the way Justin's voice rose, chest puffed, jaw clenched like he was ready to throw a punch. I begged him to stop, tugged on his arm, pleaded with him to let it go, my voice trembling as I tried to pull him back from whatever edge he was standing on, but he didn't hear me, or maybe he just didn't care. He kept pushing forward, fueled by whatever pride or anger was eating at him, until Olivia appeared like she always did, cool and collected, slipping between us like I wasn't even there. She put her hand in his, looked him dead in the eye and said, "You're acting like an idiot." And just like that he stopped. No more shouting, no more fists curled at his sides. He turned and walked out with her, her hand still in his, and he didn't even glance back at me. Not a word. Not a look. Nothing. I brought up the subject again that night when we got home, my heart still raw from being left behind in that bar like I was nothing more than background noise in his life, and I asked him, calmly, carefully, not to meet with Olivia alone anymore. His jaw tightened, and he let out this exasperated sigh like I was being unreasonable, but after a moment he agreed, though not without that look in his eyes that said he was only doing it to end the conversation, not because he truly understood. And then I made the mistake of asking the one question that had been clawing at the back of my mind since the beginning. If there was ever anything between them. That's when he exploded. He stood up, his voice rising like a wave crashing into me, and shouted, "We've been dating for less than a year and you already demand to know everything from my past?" The room went silent after that, my words still stuck in my throat, the air between us thick with everything left unsaid. I was broken after that night, shaken in a way I hadn't expected, because it wasn't just the shouting, it was the look in his eyes, the anger that flickered so fast and so unfiltered that for a moment, I felt small and scared in my own home. I didn't sleep much, kept replaying the fight in my head, wondering if I had crossed some invisible line or if I was just finally seeing a part of him he'd kept hidden. The next morning, still raw and desperate for clarity, I did something I never imagined I would. I wrote to Olivia. My hands trembled as I typed out the message, polite but pointed, asking if she'd meet me for coffee because I couldn't keep going without answers. To my surprise, she agreed almost immediately. We met at a quiet cafe near the university, and as I sat across from her, trying to steady my voice, I realized I didn't come to fight or accuse, I just wanted the truth. And she gave it to me without flinching, without dressing it up to make it easier to swallow. She just laid it all out like it was something she'd been holding in for too long. She looked me dead in the eyes and admitted that she loved Justin, that she had for years, even when she tried to pretend it was just friendship. Then she told me everything I never wanted to hear but somehow always suspected. That they had slept together, that they were friends with benefits for years, that he had used her more than once as a warm body and a soft place to land after his relationships with other women fell apart. He never chose her, not really, not in the way that mattered, but she was always there, always waiting in the background like some unspoken safety net, hoping that one day maybe he'd look at her and finally see what she'd been offering all along. She smiled sadly as she said it, like she knew how pathetic it sounded, but also like she couldn't help it, like loving him had become a kind of habit she didn't know how to break. She said she didn't want to lie to me, that I deserved the truth just as much as she deserved a shot at happiness, and in that moment, I could see how exhausted she was, exhausted from loving someone who only ever looked her way when it was convenient. But she also confessed something even heavier, something that settled deep in my chest like a stone. She couldn't leave him. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how many times he overlooked her, she remained tethered to him, always available, always answering his late-night texts, always showing up when he needed her to distract himself from his own loneliness. Even when he started new relationships like the one he had with me, she never truly stepped away. She told herself she wasn't interfering, that it wasn't her place to speak up or pull back, but she knew deep down that her presence was never neutral. She had never really let go of him because he had never fully let go of her. I thanked her quietly, numb but composed, and walked home through streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar, like the world had shifted in some small, irreversible way. I didn't cry, not yet. There was too much noise in my head, too many truths rattling around, each one undoing a piece of the illusion I had clung to for months. That evening Justin called. His name lit up my screen like a final warning, and when I answered, his voice was already mid-explanation, trying to smooth things over, talking fast and soft in that tone he always used when he knew he'd messed up but thought charm could fix it. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't unhear Olivia's words or unfeel the way I had slowly been eroded by the constant doubt. I let his voice fade into a background hum, and then, without saying a word, I hung up. And when he called again and again, I didn't answer. Not once. Not ever again. 2 weeks passed, and in that strange, hollow stretch of time, I tried to stitch myself back together in silence, staying off social media, avoiding places that reminded me of him, telling myself that the worst was over. But healing isn't linear, and one night, out of sheer instinct or weakness or some masochistic need to know, I opened my phone and scrolled. That's when I saw it. Olivia had posted a photo from a club, the kind of dimly lit snapshot full of movement and noise, but there was no mistaking what was in the frame. She was leaning into him, her arm around his neck, his face tilted toward hers, and she was drinking from his glass like it was the most natural thing in the world. The caption was something vague and harmless, but the image said everything. They were back together, or whatever twisted, codependent thing they called their relationship. And in that moment, I didn't cry or scream, I just felt cold like a final door had shut. I opened my settings, found both their names, and blocked them without hesitation. No warning, no message. Just silence. I am in pain deeper than I care to admit out loud, and even though I blocked him and walked away, I still miss Justin in the quietest parts of my day, the way he made me laugh when I was anxious, how he'd brush the hair from my face like I was something delicate, or how he always knew exactly how I liked my coffee without asking. I remember how good we had it in those early months, the softness, the warmth, the way he looked at me like I mattered, and that's the biggest trap of all, the memory of a version of him that never really existed in full. Because underneath every good moment was a thread of doubt, a shadow named Olivia, a truth I didn't want to face. And now I've faced it. I know with every part of me that he would never truly choose me, not when someone else had already filled the spaces I was trying so hard to earn. I was never the first call, never the safest place in his world no matter how much I loved him. But I'm free now. Free of the triangle, free of the pretending, free of the hope that used to keep me tethered to something that was never real. And for the first time in a long time, I have a chance to heal. Not for him, not for what could have been, but for myself. For a long time after everything ended, I kept replaying our conversations in my head like a broken record, trying to figure out where I went wrong, where we unraveled, what I missed. I remembered how he used to praise my sincerity, how he looked at me like honesty was the most beautiful thing in the world, how he'd say he wanted a partner who didn't play games, who spoke her truth, who wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. He asked me to be open, to trust him, to share everything, so I did. I peeled back layers I hadn't shown anyone else, I gave him the raw, unpolished version of me, thinking that's what he wanted. But the moment I did, the moment I asked for clarity, for reassurance, for respect, he shut down and snapped at me like I had crossed some invisible line. That wasn't love. That was something else entirely, something colder, something calculated. It wasn't partnership, it was management by charm. He knew exactly what to say to keep me close, exactly how to appear tender without ever really being vulnerable himself. He used affection like a leash, praise like a collar, and the second I pulled against the fantasy, he let the mask slip. Justin is still alive in my mind, not as a person I long to return to, but as a reminder of everything I ignored for the sake of hope, of everything I accepted just to be close to someone who never truly chose me. I still feel the ache of it sometimes, the quiet, haunting pain of being loved less than you deserve, of being someone's convenience, someone who gave their heart to a person who only ever offered pieces in return. It's a wound that doesn't bleed but bruises deeply, a kind of sorrow that sits behind the ribs and lingers when the room gets too quiet. But even with all that, I know one thing for certain now. I will not let anyone make me second best ever again. I will not compete for a place in someone's life, will not beg for the bare minimum, will not shrink myself just to fit inside someone else's indecision. I deserve more than what Justin ever gave me, and from now on, that's the only kind of love I'll make space for. Olivia texted me again out of the blue, and all she said was, "He disappeared again after that night," the words short and tired, like someone who had finally run out of excuses to make for a person who never really stayed. I stared at the message for a long time, half expecting the familiar sting of jealousy or grief to rise in my chest, but it didn't come. Instead, there was only a quiet stillness, a kind of soft exhale that felt like release. I wasn't sad anymore. I didn't feel betrayed or angry or heartbroken, I just felt compassion. For her, for the version of her who had waited so long for a love that never came. And for my past self too, the girl who had once clung to him with trembling hands, thinking if she just loved hard enough, he'd finally see her. We were both ghosts of the same story, reaching for something that was never really ours. I signed up for therapy not because I was falling apart, but because I finally wanted to understand why I had spent so long holding on to someone who made me feel small. I started running in the mornings, letting the cold air wake up something inside me that had been asleep for too long, and with each step I felt a little lighter, like I was slowly running out of the pain and into something new. I bought a pair of shoes I had wanted for months. Nothing extravagant, just something that felt like a promise to myself, a small celebration of choosing me. And one morning, after brushing my hair back and catching my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I paused. I saw someone I recognized again, not the girl waiting for a text, not the woman holding her breath beside a man who never looked fully in her direction, but someone strong, someone whole. I found myself in that mirror. Not because of him, but in spite of him. I am no longer afraid of being alone, not in the way I used to be, not in the way that once kept me tethered to half-loves and fading promises, convincing myself that proximity was the same as connection. What I've come to understand is that it was far scarier to lose myself by staying close to someone who was always looking through me, who saw just enough to keep me near but never enough to truly know me. That slow erosion of self, the quiet shrinking, the constant second-guessing, that was the real loneliness. Now, I turn my gaze back to myself, not with hesitation or shame, but with a steadiness I didn't know I had. And this time I don't look away.